Chapter 1. The Inciting Incident. I confess that I have never known a more splendid gathering than the one at Claremont House on the evening of March 3rd. The great drawing-room was ablaze with crystal chandeliers. The walls, draped in damask of deepest crimson, seemed to pulse in the candlelight. Servants in evening livery moved with quiet precision, bearing trays of pâté de foie gras and flutes of the finest champagne. Outside, a brisk March wind rattled the leaded windows, as though impatient to join in the revelry. I stood by the marble mantelpiece, notebook in hand, waiting for my friend Hercule Poirot to arrive. It was to be a soirée in honor of Lady Thornwood's recent marriage to Sir Edgar Blackwell, a union that had set tongues wagging in society circles for weeks. Lady Thornwood was resplendent in a gown of midnight velvet, her dark hair piled high with pearls. Sir Edgar, portly and self-satisfied, held court among the younger debutantes. Everyone seemed at ease, no one, save myself, suspecting that before the night's end something most extraordinary would occur. I had barely begun to note the peculiar contrast between the jovial chatter and the undercurrent of tension, that electric sense of waiting for the next moment when calm might shatter, when the Reverend Cyril Pemberton approached me, looking wholly unaccountable. "Mr. Hastings," he said, voice trembling, "have you seen Lady Thornwood's brocade slippers? They are gone." I blinked. Her slippers. He nodded, advancing into the room. Her wedding gift from her late godmother, priceless Venetian brocade, embroidered with gold thread. She left them here on that ebony table. He pointed to a small sideboard where, moments before, I had admired the delicate slippers myself. Now the table was curiously bare. At that instant, a murmur ran through the assembled guests. Lady Thornwood, having heard the Reverend's exclamation, drifted toward us. Her face, usually composed and serene, had gone pale. "My slippers?" she repeated, placing a gloved hand to her throat. "You mean stolen?" "Apparently so," the Reverend replied. "I thought I left them right here after you tried them on." His eyes darted about the room as though every face hid some guilty secret. I moved to the table and ran my fingers over its polished surface. Not a trace remained, no gold threads, no footprints, no sign that anything had been touched except by the spectre of absence itself. The room fell silent, the candles flickering in spite of the chill draught. A theatre hush descended, as if every onlooker recognized that this was no mere trifling lost accessory, but a crime that would unsettle the household. Lady Thornwood's breath caught. "Those slippers were to be worn at the ball in Venice next month," she murmured. "They meant more to me than any jewelry." A sharp exclamation jolted me from my contemplation. Colonel Gerald Fairfax, a distinguished figure in the Army Reserve, strode forward, cufflinks flashing. "This is intolerable," he said. "Who among us would dare pluck such a treasure under our very noses? Surely the thief remains close at hand." His suggestion hung in the air like an accusation. A ripple of tension followed, and I observed subtle shifts in posture. Lady Thornwood's cousin, Miss Harriet Winthrop, edged away. Mr. Roland Fairchild, the banker, narrowed his eyes. And Mrs. Selina Fane, the celebrated soprano, clasped her fan as though bracing herself for a duel of words. I jotted down the names in my book. Revered sentences formed in my mind. Each individual here carried motivations, hidden resentments, hopes, and jealousies. In a room so rich with rivalry and delicate ambition, a trifling theft could be the spark that revealed darker intentions. "Reverend," I said, stepping closer, "you are certain the slippers were here just moments ago?" He swallowed audibly. "Quite certain. I even admired the embroidery myself, and when I turned away to greet Lady Thornwood, they had vanished. Lady Thornwood's pale lips quivered. I recall placing them here while I spoke with Mrs. Fane about her upcoming concert. She peered at the gathering, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Someone must have seen me leave them. Someone must know. A low voice from the doorway diverted our attention. "Permit me, Reverend," said a slim figure in evening dress. Mademoiselle Isabelle Charpentier, a French socialite known for her sharp wit, glided forward. "If this is indeed a theft, I suggest we lock the doors and send for the police at once." Sir Edgar Blackwell cleared his throat, making for the room's center. "Nonsense," he proclaimed. "This is a private matter. We shall find the slippers before the authorities arrive. Lady Thornwood would not wish for scandal." At that, the guests began to cluster, exchanging whispered theories. An undercurrent of suspicion pulsed through the air. The polished veneer of high society, so carefully maintained, now seemed to crack, revealing jagged edges of greed or vengeance. I glanced toward the door, where, at last, my friend Hercule Poirot entered. He wore his customary immaculate black tailcoat and high starched collar. His moustaches, waxed to precise crescents, twitched as he appraised the scene. In that moment, I knew at once that the affair of the vanishing brocade slippers would be a puzzle worthy of his little grey cells. And so, amid the soft glow of candles and the hush of noble intrigue, the seed of mystery took root. Not murder, yet, but theft, and one that would unravel far deeper tensions than any of us dared suspect. Chapter 2. The first clues I watched as Hercule Poirot swept into the drawing-room with all the grace of a conductor taking up his baton. His eyes, sharp and glittering beneath those famed arches of moustache, moved from face to face as though scanning an invisible ledger of truth and falsehood. Without a word, he strode to the ebony table where the Reverend had last seen the brocade slippers. I followed dutifully, notebook at the ready. Poirot's gloved fingertips rested lightly upon the tabletop. He regarded it a long moment, then glanced at me. "Monsieur Hastings, observe the finish of the wood. It is unusual." I leaned closer to see what he meant. The deep polish was immaculate, except for a tiny linear abrasion, scarcely larger than a hair's breadth, running lengthwise along the edge. "Notez-vous?" he murmured. "It's a scratch," I replied. "But what could that mean?" Poirot's grey eyes danced. "An item of value once stood here for some time, long enough, perhaps, for one to move it back and forth, wearing the varnish ever so slightly. Yet that scratch is no accident. See how it is straight and shallow, suggesting use of a small case or box rather than careless dragging." Before I could puzzle further, Lady Thornwood approached, gathering her composure with a queenly grace. "Did you find anything, Poirot?" she asked, voice firm yet edged with anxiety. "Madame," he replied, turning to her with perfect politeness, "I observed that whatever was placed here was repeatedly moved." "Tell me, did you notice anything about the slippers case? Was it a plain box or an ornamental one?" She frowned in thought. "It was a small satin pouch, pale blue, with a drawstring. I remember because I was worried it might catch on the embroidery." "A satin pouch," Poirot repeated, nodding. "Then this scratch must come from another object entirely." He rose and circled the room, his gaze sweeping each piece of furniture. "Ah, here." He paused by a tall cabinet of dark walnut. "Monsieur Fairchild, might I ask when you last opened this cabinet?" Roland Fairchild, the banker whose funds flowed as freely as his silver tongue, stiffened. I haven't opened it tonight." I believe Mrs. Fane did earlier to retrieve some music sheets. The soprano, Mrs. Selina Fane, stepped forward, eyes flashing. That is true. I fetched my program book, but I saw nothing inside but sheet music, and I closed it immediately. Poirot raised a delicate finger. Yet notice, mes amis, the handle of the cabinet shows the faintest trace of residue, perhaps a cosmetic powder. It could be from Mrs. Fane's rouge, or from Lady Thornwood's gloves, or indeed from any of us. He tapped the wood. A nearly imperceptible fleck of powder settled on a white glove. See? A hush followed as we all leaned in. Mrs. Fane paled. Surely that is not mine, she said, brushing at her cheek. I applied nothing since arriving. Poirot's glance rested on her, inscrutable, intriguing. He then pivoted to Colonel Fairfax, who stood arms crossed. And you, Colonel, did you examine the drawing-room upon your first arrival? The Colonel squared his shoulders. I noted nothing amiss beyond these unfortunate events. I confess I did not inspect every surface. Understandable, Poirot said kindly. Yet the thief, if indeed a thief, must have moved through this room twice, once to take the slippers, and again to place some clue, or to mislead. Note the window latch, unlocked, though closed. One could open it from inside without much disturbance. He walked to the sash and lifted it a hair's breadth. See how the lock is slightly bent? Someone forced it carefully, entering or leaving, though we heard no noise. A murmur rippled. The idea of an intruder, perhaps external, began to take root. Yet the doors remained bolted from within. Who, then, could have passed through? And why tamper with the cabinet and pouch? Poirot turned to me. Monsieur Hastings, I ask you to. Note the pallor of Miss Winthrop's cheeks. I looked to Harriet Winthrop, Lady Thornwood's cousin, seated on a wing-back chair. Her face was unnaturally white. She claims to have admired the slippers earlier. Yet her glove is, shall we say, remarkably clean for someone who handled pale blue satin. Miss Winthrop's mouth parted in a protest. Of course I washed my hands afterwards. Of course, Poirot murmured. But the napkin on which the pouch was placed bears a faint crease, cat's whisker diagonals, as if folded and unfolded in haste. See here, on the lace edge. He held it aloft, and in the lamplight I saw the pattern of folds. Lady Thornwood's eyes brimmed. That napkin was mine. I left it by the table when I tried on the slippers. Poirot's lips curved. Madame, it seems someone tried to return the pouch but fumbled. The pouch itself is missing, but the napkin bears its imprint. He handed the cloth back. Our thief is imperfect. They slip up, revealing more than they conceal. Silence fell, broken only by the ticking of a gilt clock. Each of us registered that subtle shift. What began as a simple disappearance was now a cipher of small errors, each whispering a secret. I scribbled furiously, scratch on table, powder in cabinet, bent window latch, clean gloves, napkin crease. In Poirot's calm persistence lay a promise. He would press each small fact until the solution emerged. And so, as the candles guttered low, the first real cracks in our facade of certainty began to show, and with them the promise of deeper revelations yet to come. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. Once the first stirrings of suspicion had taken root, the atmosphere in Claremont House shifted perceptibly. Guests, who had been chatting merrily now, fell silent as they observed one another, posture stiff, faces taut with unspoken questions. Poirot, standing by the grand piano, lifted a slender hand to draw our attention. Mes amis, he began, voice low but carrying, we must assemble the circle of those present, when the brocade slippers vanished. He motioned to Colonel Gerald Fairfax, who stepped forward, with a military crispness. Colonel Fairfax had served with distinction in India, his medals testament to acts of bravery. Yet there had been whispers, among society's quieter corners, of financial mismanagement, of loans called in too late, forcing the colonel into discreet entanglements with the Blackwell banking interests. He met Poirot's gaze evenly, though I noted his jaw twitch. Next, Poirot indicated Harriet Winthrop. The young cousin of Lady Thornwood, she drifted forward with nervous grace. Miss Winthrop was an aspiring sculptor, her work gaining modest acclaim. I had met her once, beneath the vaulted studio ceilings of Montague Square, where alabaster shavings lay like snowfall underfoot. She spoke little now, eyes downcast, as though hoping to vanish entirely. Roland Fairchild, banker and financier, was summoned next. His reputation was sterling, his influence deep. Under lamplight, he appeared handsome, with his slicked-back hair and tailored coat. Yet subtle rumors clung to him. Passions gambled away at Monte Carlo, alliances brokered in smoke-filled rooms. He cleared his throat, offering a polite bow to Lady Thornwood, before standing at attention. Mrs. Selina Fane, the celebrated soprano, emerged from a corner where she had been practicing a dramatic flourish on the piano's ivory keys. Her voice, hushed, carried an undercurrent of steel. She had performed in Vienna and Milan. Her diaries spoke of rivals envying both her talent and her beauty. Her talent and her beauty. A single crimson vein pulsed at her temple as she joined the small circle. Then came Reverend Cyril Pemberton. Beneath his clerical collar and gentle mien lay a man of exacting habits. Parish records described his charitable repairs to the parish schoolhouse, but a minor scandal, dismissed quietly, hinted at a heated dispute over a legacy left by a wealthy parishioner. His hands trembled slightly as he stood beside Poirot. Lady Thornwood herself took her place at the centre. In her dark silk gown she seemed both vulnerable and imperious. I recalled her story. An only child, daughter of a baroness, thrust into high society as a ward at 16. Her previous engagement had ended abruptly, no explanation given publicly, before her marriage to Sir Edgar had ignited fresh gossip. To complete the circle, Poirot beckoned Mademoiselle Isabelle Charpentier. The French beauty, with her quick wit and sharper tongue, was a fixture of every prominent salon. She had arrived in England only 2 seasons ago, carrying letters of introduction from Parisian royalty. Some said she financed her grand lifestyle through less reputable channels, delicate loans from unknown lenders, when all were. Assembled in a loose arc before the mantel, Poirot steepled his fingers. "You see, mes amis," he said, "we have an intimate gathering. Each of you knew of the brocade slippers, and each could have taken them, or so it should seem." He paused, letting the charged silence settle. "But the question is, who had reason most compelling, and who had opportunity without detection?" I noticed that, as Poirot spoke, the Reverend clutched his Bible, knuckles whitening. Mrs. Fane's fan opened and closed in rapid flutter. Roland Fairchild's eye lingered on the cabinet handle, and Colonel Fairfax shifted his weight, as though uncomfortable on the polished floorboards. Lady Thornwood's voice broke the tension. "You will pardon my intrusion, Monsieur Poirot, but I should like each of you to recount your whereabouts for the half-hour before the slippers were discovered missing." Fairchild stepped forward. "I was in the billiard-room playing a game with Sir Edgar. Afterwards I fetched a brandy from the sideboard and returned here at Lady Thornwood's request to join the party." He offered a courteous nod to Sir Edgar, who murmured agreement from the far end of the room. Miss Winthrop's admission came next, breath caught in her throat. I was in the conservatory, sketching the orchids. Then I walked through here on my way to the ladies' powder room." She paused. I did pause to admire the slippers, but I swear I touched nothing but the case. Colonel Fairfax took his turn. I was inspecting the grounds briefly for the return of guests who wished to smoke outside. The spring air suited my constitution. He inclined his head toward the slightly ajar window. Reverend Pemberton cleared his throat. "I was in the library, arranging books for tomorrow's sermon. When I heard the exclamation, I hurried back to the drawing-room." Mrs. Fane spoke calmly, though her voice tremored. "I practiced my final aria by the piano, then stood by the walnut cabinet for a moment, awaiting the chorus of admirers." Her eyes flicked to Poirot. Mademoiselle Charpentier smiled slightly. "I was conversing with Sir Edgar about his travels in North Africa. When his anecdote concluded, I took tea in the dining-room, then returned here." Finally, Lady Thornwood described lingering near the table after trying on the slippers, busied herself with delicate adjustments to her gown. Poirot listened to each, head inclined, expression inscrutable. When they finished, he uttered only, "Merci, your accounts will serve." He then beckoned me to his side. As I approached, I saw him study the faces of each suspect, eyes narrowing. "Note, Hastings," he whispered, "the order of their narratives. The slip in factual sequence will reveal much more than any overt confession." His lips curved in a faint smile. "But patience, mon ami. We shall dissect this puzzle with the precision it deserves." And so the circle was drawn. Motive and opportunity lay evenly across the assembled guests. Yet like a mummified relic waiting to be unwrapped, the truth remained sealed, held fast by artful lies and subtle deceptions. It would be Poirot's task to unbind each layer until the vanishing slippers themselves whispered their secret. Chapter 4. Poirot arrives. I had barely begun to ponder the delicate web of alibis and half-truths spun by the company when the salon doors opened with theatrical precision. A hush fell over the assembled guests, heads turning as Hercule Poirot made his entrance. He appeared as if stepping out of some stagecoach of fate, back ramrod straight, gloved hands clasped before him, his small, impeccably shod feet placing one measured step after another across the oriental carpet. His high-collared coat was as dark as a raven's wing, his cravat a perfect white swathe against his carefully starched shirt. Even before he spoke, his presence commanded attention. Poirot paused at the threshold, surveying the room with those famously piercing grey eyes, each eyebrow arching in silent appraisal. He inclined his head in greeting to Lady Thornwood, whose anxious features tilled further until she managed a faint, grateful smile. Then he turned to Sir Edgar Blackwell, who rose with exaggerated courtesy, to Mrs. Selina Fane, who offered a curt nod, and to each of the suspects arrayed before the mantelpiece. I noticed how Poirot's gaze lingered, a scant second more on the Reverend's trembling fingers, a flicker of interest in the way Miss Winthrop's gown brushed the floor, a subtle contraction of his lips as he noted Colonel Fairfax's rigid posture. At last, with a voice smooth and measured, he spoke. "Bonsoir, mes amis. I have had the pleasure of receiving Lady Thornwood's invitation, and I pray you will excuse my tardiness. I trust the evening's festivities proceed with the expected joy." His manner was polite, but in his tone lay a quiet challenge, as though inviting the company to present their best pretense. Sir Edgar cleared his throat. "Monsieur Poirot, how fortunate that you have arrived. We find ourselves in rather an unfortunate circumstance." He gestured at the empty ebony table. "Lady Thornwood's prized brocade slippers have vanished." Poirot's eyebrows rose. Indeed? Then I am beholden to fate for guiding me here at precisely the right moment. He approached the table, his gait unhurried, each step a note of purpose. Lifting one gloved hand, he tapped the polished surface once, softly. Mademoiselle, permettez-moi. Vos pantoufles, je comprends. Étaient pour se trouver ici? Très bien. He turned to observe the scratch along the edge and the faint glimmer of cosmetic residue on the cabinet handle. I watched his face register no surprise on the cabinet handle. I watched his face register no surprise, though every detail had doubtless registered in his mind. He turned again to the suspects. I would propose that we dispense with superficial speculation. This is not a matter to be resolved by hasty accusation, but by calm analysis of facts. He paused to allow the weight of his words to settle. Pray, would someone be so kind as to recount the events of this evening from the moment Lady Thornwood first revealed her new gift? Lady Thornwood stepped forward, her throat trembling slightly. I received the brocade slippers from my late godmother this afternoon. I tried them on and placed them here, intending to wear them tonight at dinner. Reverend Pemberton discovered they were missing just moments ago. Poirot nodded gravely, then signaled to the Reverend. And you, mon ami, did you note anything unusual? The Reverend swallowed and spoke in his soft, tremulous tone. Only that I admired the intricate embroidery. I saw nothing untoward until the discovery. Poirot inclined his head. Très bien. Let us proceed one by one and speak plainly. You, Colonel Fairfax, where were you when the slippers came to be placed here? The Colonel cleared his throat. I had been inspecting the grounds. I returned to find much commotion. He folded his arms as though seeking steadiness in rigidity. Beyond that, I observed nothing. Poirot's expression remained serene, yet I detected the glimmer of a challenge in his eyes. He moved on to Miss Winthrop, then Fairchild, Mrs. Fane, and Mademoiselle Charpentier, gently drawing from each more precise details than their earlier statements had revealed. Each suspect's account Poirot received with courteous attention, yet his eyes betrayed an unspoken critique, quietly filing away contradictions, the foot that slipped from the script, the hesitation before a remembered detail, the curious specificity when ambiguity would have served better. After the last account was given, Poirot folded his hands behind his back and addressed the group. Mes amis, the truth does not reside in grand gestures nor loud proclamations. It lies in the silent spaces between words, in the residue left upon a surface, in the angle of a glance. I have observed in this room hints of more than simple carelessness. The scratch on this table edge, the powder in the cabinet, the bent window latch, all speak of action quietly repeated or deliberately disguised. He paused, letting that sink in. A low murmur circulated among the guests. I saw eyes widen at the mention of each clue. Poirot held up a single finger. At present, we must withhold judgment until we have examined more closely the hearts and minds of those present. I shall require a private word with certain individuals and a careful survey of this room's architecture, its doors, windows, and passages. With that, he turned on his heel and strode toward the window where the latch lay bent. I followed at a respectful distance, prepared to offer my assistance. As I knelt to inspect the mechanism with Poirot, I felt the electric thrill of a truly perplexing conundrum. So far, each suspect wore the mask of innocence, yet under each mask lurked a motive waiting to be unmasked by our little grey cells. Thus did Monsieur Hercule Poirot take charge of the investigation, not as some frantic pursuer of immediate confessions, but as a surgeon poised before a patient, steady, precise, and wholly intent on revealing what lay hidden beneath the surface. And as the candles flickered in the growing draught, I knew that with each meticulous step, we were drawing closer to that stunning moment when the shadows would part and the truth would stand revealed. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. I found myself alone with Hercule Poirot in the hushed antechamber off the drawing-room, candlelight dancing upon gilt-framed portraits and low murmur of concerned guests beyond the door. Poirot had instructed that we speak first to those whose testimonies puzzled him most, an order that promised to cast further light upon the tangled circumstances of the missing brocade slippers. He motioned me close. "Hastings, my friend, observe well the countenance of each interviewee. A tremble here, a clouded glance there. These are the true signposts." His voice, barely above a whisper, brimmed with purpose. Our first visitor was Reverend Cyril Pemberton. He entered in a state of nervous deference, clutching his Bible as if it were the only anchor in a dark sea. We settled into high-backed chairs facing one another. I took notes while Poirot posed his questions with quiet precision. "Reverend," Poirot began, "you spoke of arranging books in the library before discovering the theft. May I ask exactly which volumes you handled?" The Reverend cleared his throat. "Theological texts primarily, Augustine, Calvin, those used for Sunday's sermon." He paused, glancing down at the Bible in his lap. "I catalogued some gift editions bequeathed by Mrs. Blackwell last season." Poirot nodded, steepling his fingers. "And did any of those volumes bear marks, ribbons, scraps of paper, or loose threads?" "None," the Reverend replied with earnest certainty. Yet as he spoke, I noticed a slight quiver in his left hand. "But," he added, hesitating, "I did find a small scrap of blue satin on the tome De Officiis Clericorum. I assumed it had blown in from the window." "A scrap of blue satin?" Poirot's eyes sparkled. "Precisely our color of interest. Do you still have it?" The Reverend shook his head. I thought it best to discard it, lest it distract me." His eyes dropped to his lap, lips pressed together. I sensed he withheld something further, but Poirot allowed the uncertainty to linger. Next came Miss Harriet Winthrop. She floated in, hands clasped, eyes wide with apprehension. She spoke softly of sketches interrupted in the conservatory. But when Poirot asked her to describe the orchids she had drawn, her details faltered. She could recall only the hue of petals, not the species. "Madame," Poirot inquired, "you claim to have passed the table and admired the slippers. Yet your gloves bear no stain of gold embroidery, nor indeed a crease matching the pouch's imprint." He tapped the glove she wore. "How do you explain this absence?" Miss Winthrop's breath caught. I cleaned my gloves in the ladies' powder room immediately after." She glanced at me, pleadingly. "I did not wish to soil them." Poirot studied her. An admirable precaution, but unnecessary if one merely admired. One who handled the pouch might have feared leaving threads behind. He let the observation hang, watching her cheeks color. Roland Fairchild followed, regal and composed. He recounted his billiards game and brandy interlude with Sir Ed. Regal and composed. He recounted his billiards game and brandy interlude with Sir Edgar Blackwell. Poirot inquired about the precise timing, down to the minute, of each stroke and sip. Fairchild complied, citing each sequence with banker's exactness. Yet when pressed on the duration of the game's final frame, his answer wavered by nearly 2 minutes. "Your memory is precise, monsieur," Poirot said, "except when it is not." He tapped the table. You mention your cue struck the 8 ball at 8:16. Yet Lady Thornwood's maid observed you near this cabinet at 8:17, adjusting the music sheets. How did you manage so swift a passage? Fairchild's confident facade cracked for an instant. I believe the maid must be mistaken. He recovered instantly. My apologies. She misheard the time. Poirot's gaze was kindly, yet firm. I see, thank you. Then Mrs. Selina Fane, whose self-possession rivaled that of royalty, presented herself. She described her practice by the piano, the spectators who had offered applause, and her momentary survey of the cabinet. Poirot inquired about her powder and rouge, whether applied that evening, and she assured him she had dressed fully before arrival, touching up nothing post-maid's assistance. Yet when Poirot asked her to provide the brand of rouge she wore, her reply was vague. A custom blend, mixed for me in Vienna. Custom, you say? Poirot murmured, arching an eyebrow, and thus untraceable. He nodded slowly. Mademoiselle Isabelle Charpentier arrived last, every inch the polished socialite. She recounted her tea in the dining-room, her conversation with Sir Edgar. Poirot queried the precise nature of their discussion, North African customs and camel trade routes, and when she ventured a minor detail incorrectly, she paused, then corrected herself with surprising zeal, almost as if masking a moment of hesitation. Throughout each interview, Poirot remained patient, his questions surgical. After the final guest departed, he turned to me. Hastings, note the patterns. Each suspect's confidence falters when pressed on points they presumed innocuous. The Reverend discards evidence. Miss Winthrop sanitizes her gloves. Fairchild rewrites his timeline. Mrs. Fane obfuscates her cosmetics. Mademoiselle Charpentier overcorrects. He tapped his temple gently. The mind, when under duress, betrays itself in tiny betrayals. We have threads enough to weave a theory, yet we must not yet sew the final stitch. He rose and beckoned me toward the drawing-room door. Come, let us survey the scene once more, before the suspects have had time to conspire anew. I rose, feeling the thrill of anticipation. By probing those nervous fissures, Poirot had begun to fracture the veneer of polite society. These fractures, I sensed, would soon splinter into revelations none among us could have foreseen. And in one of those revelations lay the key to the vanishing brocade slippers. Chapter 6. The First False Lead. By the time the clock struck 9, a gathering of concerned servants and Colonel Fairfax had formed around Sir Edgar Blackwell in the library. The Colonel, emboldened by a misplaced certainty, had convinced Sir Edgar that the matter could be settled swiftly. He declared that Miss Harriet Winthrop must be the culprit, citing her proximity to the table and her hankering for social acclaim. Before long, the local constable, summoned reluctantly by Sir Edgar's insistence, was ushered into the drawing-room, ready to accept the first plausible suspect. I stood by Poirot as the constable, a stern young man with polished boots and a conscientious air, listened to Colonel Fairfax's pointed recitation. "She was seen near the slippers, sir," the colonel asserted, voice ringing with authority. "Her glove was suspiciously clean, and she lingered in the conservatory moments before the discovery. I quite believe she removed them and concealed them elsewhere." Miss Winthrop, trembling in the center of the parlor, lifted her chin bravely. "I swear I did not take them. My sketches were in my satchel in the conservatory. You may search it, every inch." Her plea, however, fell on determined ears. The constable strode to the conservatory and returned with her leather satchel, empty save for charcoal pencils and watercolors. "Perhaps the pouch is hidden within," Colonel Fairfax suggested. In less than a minute the satchel was opened, and rifled through. The air held a painful silence. All eyes rested on Harriet as the constable produced nothing but art supplies. Yet the damage was done. The colonel's assumptions, backed by official procedure, cast a pall over Miss Winthrop. Mrs. Selina Fane, standing in a corner, crossed her arms. "A convenient escape, that," she murmured. "Why should anyone suspect Harriet, if not because she is the first to shift attention from herself?" Roland Fairchild chuckled. "Indeed. And you, my dear Harriet, have the most tenuous alibi, sketches unseen by anyone." Miss Winthrop stood rigid, lips pressed tight. Lady Thornwood's hand trembled as she touched her cousin's shoulder, eyes brimming with pity. Yet even Lady Thornwood's sympathy could not shake the conviction of Colonel Fairfax. With authority born of rank and social expectation, he pronounced that Miss Winthrop would be detained until further inquiries. Poirot laid a gentle hand upon the constable's shoulder. "Excuse me, mon ami, but prudence requires we examine all facts before confinement. Miss Winthrop's protestations are heartfelt, and her satchel was shown to contain nothing." He turned to the colonel. "Colonel, might I suggest one small request? Allow me to see that satchel's inner lining more closely." Colonel Fairfax hesitated, brow creasing, but Sir Edgar intervened. "Very well, though time is of the essence." He waved the constable aside, and Poirot knelt beside Harriet's satchel. He lifted the opening of the bag, his fingers brushing the leather lining. "Ah, this stitching is recent, yes? See how the interior pocket is a different thread color from the exterior seam." He pointed to subtle misalignment in the stitching. "One might have tampered with it, adding a false lining." The colonel blinked. "You mean someone hid the slippers inside a false pocket?" Poirot rose, brushing imaginary dust from his coat. "It is possible. Yet the seam is so crude, one would notice the pouch brushing against the fabric. Miss Winthrop's gloved fingers would surely detect such a bump." He closed the satchel gently and showed the outside seams to the assembled company. "Furthermore," Poirot continued, "if one were to add a pouch inside, one would not then discard the scrap of satin in the library. They would retrieve every fragment to conceal their crime more thoroughly." At that, the constable conceded that Mr. Winthrop's satchel appeared innocuous enough. Colonel Fairfax stammered a half-hearted apology, but the damage lingered. Harriet's face, pale and drawn, betrayed the weight of shame unjustly heaped upon her. Meanwhile, Inspector Meldrum, a portly fellow with red cheeks and a cloudy brow, entered the room. He nodded gravely at Colonel Fairfax, as though confirming the colonel's judgment. "We shall keep Miss Winthrop here until morning," he declared. "Evidence, however circumstantial, demands caution." A collective gasp ensued. I saw perception flicker in Mrs. Fane's narrowed eyes. Mademoiselle Charpentier touched her fan to her lips, thoughtful. Poirot's expression, however, remained composed, though I detected the slightest flicker of disquiet in his eyes. He bowed politely to the inspector. "Of course, sir. But might I request to speak with you later? A detective's task is never complete without examining every angle." Inspector Meldrum grunted, but nodded. "We will adjourn to discuss pertinent details in my office down the hall." He motioned to his constable, and they ushered the inspector from the room, leaving Miss Winthrop trembling yet still upright. Once the door closed, a hush swept the drawing-room. The guests exchanged uncertain glances, as though the very air had thickened with the scent of injustice. Lady Thornwood sobbed softly, placing her hand beneath her cousin's chin. Colonel Fairfax cleared his throat, attempting to resume decorum. Poirot cleared his throat softly, drawing everyone's attention. Mes amis, let us not be too hasty in condemning an innocent soul. The facts, when properly weighed, must speak for themselves. I confess that Miss Winthrop's situation is troubling, but I sense greater complexity at work. He allowed his gaze to drift over the assembled suspects. We shall proceed with patience. The first suspect is rarely the true culprit. Then, turning to me, he said quietly, "Hastings, this diversion is exactly the sort of tapestry one might weave to obscure the true design. We must now unpick the threads leading to a more substantive clue." His voice was barely audible, but its meaning was clear. The first lead was false, and the real path lay hidden behind a murky veil of misdirection. As Colonel Fairfax regained his composure and the inspector returned to oversee Miss Winthrop's confinement, I sensed the shift in the room. What began as a straightforward accusation had blossomed into a grand performance of innocence and guilt. Yet beneath the drama lay a subtle truth, one that only Poirot's unerring intellect could extract, and, when the time was right, he would reveal to astonished eyes that nothing was as it seemed. Chapter 7. The Psychological Game. A restless tension settled over Claremont House as the evening wore on. Guests clustered in small knots, exchanging furtive glances, while servants moved quietly, offering tea and biscuits in an attempt to dispel the unease. I found Poirot standing by the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, watching the interplay of suspicion and fear with his customary serenity. "Monsieur Hastings," he said, beckoning me closer, "the hour is ripe for a game of mind. We must press each suspect gently, like a vintner testing the ripeness of grapes, until the faintest crack reveals the promise of truth." He stepped forward and addressed the assembled company. "Mes amis, if you will indulge me, I propose a small exercise. I shall present a statement based upon what I have observed, and I ask each of you to respond with candor. Does this accord with your own recollection?" With polite curiosity, the guests agreed. Poirot cleared his throat, his grey eyes alight. "Firstly, the scratch on the ebony table suggests the repeated movement of a solid object, one of weight and substance, back and forth." He paused, letting the image settle. "Which of you might have handled such an object near this table this evening?" A hush ensued. Colonel Fairfax stiffened, then shook his head. "Not I. My business was outside." His tone was firm, yet I noted a slight catch in his voice. Beside him, Reverend Pemberton lowered his gaze. Mrs. Fane adjusted her fan. Miss Winthrop's gloved hands tightened around her teacup. Poirot turned to Lady Thornwood. "Madame, you placed the slippers here, but did you also handle anything else? Perhaps a heavy music folio or a decanter?" Lady Thornwood hesitated. "Only the champagne bottle earlier, when I welcomed guests." Her voice wavered, but I moved it to retrieve a napkin. Poirot inclined his head, steepling his fingers. "Très bien. That explains the slight transfer of moisture on the table's surface. Now the presence of cosmetic powder in the walnut cabinet suggests that someone, not merely passing by, paused there, perhaps out of habit." He shifted his gaze deliberately to Mrs. Fane. "Madame, you testified to visiting the cabinet for your music sheets. Pray, did you pause to adjust your rouge or powder after that?" Mrs. Fane's posture sharpened. "I assure you, Monsieur Poirot, I required no touch-ups this evening. My makeup was applied at home." Her lip curled slightly, as if lightly mistaking indignation for dignity. Poirot's moustaches twitched in silent amusement. "Then you have an extraordinarily unblemished complexion, despite leaning in close to the mirror each night, I imagine. Curious." He allowed his eyes to linger on her reflection in the glass before moving on. "And you, Reverend," he said, pivoting, "you discovered a scrap of blue satin amidst your theological volumes. Why discard it? Rather than preserve evidence, one would normally keep such an odd fragment." The Reverend's eyes misted. "I feared scandal. I did not wish to appear involved." His voice trembled, as though the weight of his office struggled against the knowledge he withheld. Poirot nodded kindly. "Fear of disgrace is a potent motive, mon ami. Yet a man of faith might have offered the fragment to the owner, had he known its origin." He fixed the Reverend with a gentle stare. "Did you suspect the scrap might implicate you?" The Reverend paled, then shook his head, as if dispelling the notion. "No, no, monsieur. I simply wished to preserve the dignity of Lady Thornwood." A murmur ran through the group. Poirot raised a gloved hand. "Patience. Now, to the banker, Monsieur Fairchild. You corrected the time of your billiards frame by 2 minutes. You suggested the maid misheard, yet the clock here is accurate to the second. Why the discrepancy?" Fairchild's composure flickered. He took a breath, voice measured. "Memory is faulty when one drinks. Just a single brandy, mind you. But even a sip can cloud recollection." He bowed his head. "I did not mean to mislead." "Clouded recollection or clouded conscience?" Poirot asked quietly. He held Fairchild's gaze without accusation, letting the question hang. Fairchild's jaw clenched, but he offered no retort. Finally, Poirot addressed Mademoiselle Charpentier. "You described your tea with Sir Edgar, yet when asked about the price of those exotic teas, you deferred to a merchant's tale. If you discussed camel trade, you would recall the cost per pound. Why the evasion?" Her lips curved in a practiced smile. "Monsieur Poirot, certain details are dull to recount." But her eyes flickered to Sir Edgar, as if seeking reassurance. With each response, Poirot observed a subtle tremor, a hesitation, a deflection, a veneer cracking under polite pressure. He folded his hands behind him and surveyed the room. "You see, mes amis, the mind under gentle stress reveals its hidden patterns. The truth, like a pearl, must be coaxed from the oyster of deception." He paused, voice lowering to a confidential murmur. "We have before us motives as varied as the characters here. Fear of scandal, desire for wealth, protection of reputation, avoidance of scandal, each is strong enough to drive one to mischief." He let his glance sweep the suspects. "But motives alone do not a culprit make. We require the pivotal moment, the fleeting second when opportunity met intent." Then, with quiet authority, he dismissed the gathering. "You may retire for the evening, but reflect upon our conversation. Tomorrow you will each aid me in reviewing personal effects, gloves, handkerchiefs, gloves, fans, for traces of our vanished slippers." As the guests dispersed, I noted the flicker of relief in some eyes and apprehension in others. Colonel Fairfax looked sullen. Mrs. Fane's posture remained rigid. Miss Winthrop's cheeks glowed with indignation. Mademoiselle Charpentier lingered, her gaze fixed thoughtfully on the fireplace embers. Poirot placed a gentle hand upon my shoulder. "Hastings, the pieces are moving. Very soon the clearance of false paths will bring the single, true one into view." His moustaches quivered in mirth. "And then I shall show society a solution most elegant." With that, he turned toward the library, lantern in hand, ready to pursue the next intangible shadow of our puzzling affair. Chapter 8. A Secondary Mystery. The hours passed as a fragile quiet settled over Claremont House. Each suspect had retired to their chambers or to the drawing-room couches, where polite conversation fluttered like the wings of trapped birds. Poirot and I took advantage of the lull to reconvene by the ebony table lantern in hand, and review the latest observations. Yet scarcely had we begun when an urgent knock sounded at the door, followed by the entrance of Lady Thornwood's maid, Emily. "Monsieur Poirot," she gasped, cheeks flushed. "Madame's desk in the boudoir. There's been a disturbance." Without hesitation, Poirot bid her lead the way. The boudoir lay down the corridor, its scent of lavender and rosewater still lingering in the hush of night. Lady Thornwood's writing desk stood before a large mirror, its drawers half open, papers strewn across the Persian rug. A single item lay conspicuously on the floor, a torn fragment of parchment, its jagged edge hinting at a document violently ripped. Lady Thornwood stood at the far end, hand pressed to her heart, eyes wide with shock. "My grandmother's will," she whispered. It was here, the original copy in her own hand, gone. I found this scrap when I came to fetch my prayer book. I stepped forward to examine the fragment. The parchment bore elegant loops of an old-fashioned hand mentioning all jewels and personal effects, including the brocade slippers, before trailing off where the tear had severed the rest. Poirot crouched beside the desk and gently ran a gloved fingertip along the edge of the top drawer. "See, Hastings," he said softly. "The lock on this drawer has been jiggled, though not forced. A delicate operation, requiring both dexterity and knowledge of this fine mechanism." Emily, the maid, wrung her hands. I haven't seen anyone here since Madame retired. I locked the door. I promise." Poirot nodded. "And yet the document is gone. More than that, the will named Lady Thornwood sole beneficiary of her godmother's estate, valued at many thousands. Without it, any claim to those assets could be contested or manipulated." He rose, parchment fragment in hand. "We have moved from theft of slippers to theft of legacy." Lady Thornwood's voice trembled. "Why? What could this have to do with the slippers?" "Everything," Poirot replied. He laid the scrap gently against the desk's surface. "You see, Madame, the two unlock separate doors to motive. The slippers themselves carried sentimental weight, but the will carries greater consequence, control of wealth and property. Someone seeks to gain or to deny your inheritance." He turned to the remaining houseguests, summoned by the maid's alarm, and found each lingering in the threshold. Colonel Fairfax, stern-faced, Mrs. Fane, clutching her shawl, Roland Fairchild, adjusting his cravat, Mademoiselle Charpentier, lips pursed, and Reverend Pemberton, eyes downcast. Poirot addressed them calmly. "Mes amis, we have before us a second crime. The original will has vanished. This suggests our perpetrator has goals more intricate than a moment's whim. They not only sought to deprive Lady Thornwood of her slippers, but also to reshape her future by erasing her claim to family riches." A stunned murmur rippled through the group. I noted Colonel Fairfax's brow crease, Fairchild's swift intake of breath, and Mrs. Fane's rapid breath that seemed to catch on a note of panic. Even kindly, Reverend Pemberton appeared shaken. Poirot pressed on. "I propose we examine the boudoir contents. Parchments, letters, and diaries. Anything that might hide the missing will or that could shed light on the thief's intent." He beckoned each guest in turn, instructing them to recount any passage they had used or opened in the desk earlier that evening. Colonel Fairfax went first. "I passed by the boudoir to admire a landscape painting, but I did not enter." He stiffened as Poirot's eyes studied his response. Mrs. Fane admitted, "I passed through here when seeking water after my rehearsal, only to find the desk undisturbed." Yet her hands shook as she spoke. Fairchild confessed, I ventured here to read a letter from London concerning a business matter. I opened the middle drawer. Nothing else. His gaze slid toward the metal keyhole in the desk. Mademoiselle Charpentier smiled thinly. I visited the boudoir for a moment's privacy, to adjust my coiffure in the mirror. I saw the will then resting under this blotter. She indicated the blotter top with a casual flick of her fan. Reverend Pemberton cleared his throat. I delivered a note from the vicarage to Madame and saw the desk closed as usual. Poirot listened to each account, then lifted a corner of the blotter to reveal faint impressions upon the writing surface, a mirror image of the will's last tested paragraph. "Monsieur Fairchild," he said, turning to the banker, "you mentioned removing a letter. Might you have set the will aside inadvertently?" Fairchild frowned. I could not mistake a will for a letter. His tone suggested wounded pride. Poirot nodded. "Of course. But consider the possibility that the will was hidden in another location, perhaps concealed within a book or folded inside an envelope bearing another name." He pivoted to me. "Hastings, let us search the nearby bookshelf for books out of place or with recent signs of handling." As we approached the walnut bookcase, I saw Poirot's keen eye notice a leather-bound volume with a slightly brighter spine, its neighbor dulled with age. He opened the volume to the brain-teaser, extracted the missing will, and held it aloft. A collective gasp filled the room. Lady Thornwood clutched the document to her chest. Fairchild's face went ashen. Colonel Fairfax's mouth hung open. Mrs. Fane and Mademoiselle Charpentier exchanged startled glances. The Reverend closed his eyes, appearing to whisper a silent prayer. Poirot smiled gently. The second mystery, mes amis, was but an extension of our first. The will was hidden with intention, to draw attention away from a subtler motive. The missing slippers and missing will are threads of the same tapestry. Yet for now, we bear witness to their recovery, not their destroyer. He handed the will to Lady Thornwood, bowing in courteous respect. "Madam, your inheritance is once again secure. But the question remains, who among us planned this dual deception, and why?" As Lady Thornwood sank into a nearby chair, trembling with relief, Poirot's gaze swept the assembled suspects. In that moment, I knew the game had become infinitely more complex, and that each revelation only served to deepen the enigma awaiting the final unmasking. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The recovery of Lady Thornwood's will brought a momentary respite, yet the stillness that followed felt more like the lull before a storm. In the library's soft glow, Poirot and I gathered the remaining guests once more, each summoned by handwritten notes delivered with discreet urgency. The drawing-room, once the stage for polite intrigue, now brimmed with taut anticipation. Poirot stood before the tall windows, the flicker of gaslight illuminating his thoughtful countenance. "Mes amis," he began, voice gentle yet carrying undeniable authority. "We have seen the surface of this matter. Slippers stolen, will hidden, both recovered. Yet beneath these events lies a web of relationships and obligations, threads that bind you to one another in unseen ways. It is within these hidden connections that the motive for our true culprit shall be found." He motioned to Colonel Fairfax first. "Colonel, you are related by marriage to the Blackwells. That I understand. But there are whispers that your financial woes have grown deeper since your posting in India. Is it not so that you hope to secure a larger portion of Lady Thornwood's inheritance to settle your debts?" The Colonel's stiff posture faltered. He drew in a breath. "I admit that my finances require attention," he said slowly, "but I would never stoop to theft. I have served my country with honor and would not besmirch my name." "Of course," Poirot replied smoothly. Yet his eyes, narrowing slightly, suggested he found merit in the possibility. He turned to Roland Fairchild. "Monsieur Fairchild, as banker to Sir Edgar Blackwell, you manage considerable sums on his behalf. I understand you also serve as executor of Lady Thornwood's estate." Fairchild inclined his head. "I do. A position of trust which I hold with the utmost seriousness." "Then you stand to gain fees and influence should Lady Thornwood's assets be consolidated under your care." Poirot's gaze lingered. "Perhaps even a secret bonus, no?" The banker's expression hardened. "My compensation is agreed by contract and witnessed. There is no secret clause." Poirot's lips twitched. "We shall verify the paperwork. Now, Mrs. Fane, you, whose voice has brought comfort to many, are also reputed to be a beneficiary in Lady Thornwood's patronage. Her support funded your debut in Milan, did it not?" The soprano's cheeks flushed. "Lady Thornwood's kindness granted me that opportunity. I owe her much, yet I lack the means to repay." She clasped her shawl, "But I would never repay her from her own coffers." "Ah," Poirot murmured, "yet would it not mend your own precarious finances if a portion of those funds were redirected in gratitude?" He let the question hover. Mademoiselle Charpentier stepped forward, adjusting the lace at her throat. "Monsieur Poirot, I have lent Lady Thornwood substantial funds to maintain her household's lavish aesthetic. Those loans, you see, carry high interest." She let her words settle. "I trust she will repay me soon." Poirot's eyes glittered. "One hopes, yes. And if she were unable to repay, one might gain leverage." A hush fell. I noted Miss Winthrop slip silently into the room, released from detention by Sir Edgar's intervention. Her sculptor's hands clutched a small leather folder. Poirot inclined his head in greeting. "Miss Winthrop, I understand you have some matter to present?" She drew forward, producing a set of letters tied with a ribbon. "I found these in my studio," she said, voice steady though her pulse fluttered. "Correspondence between Lady Thornwood and Colonel Fairfax, intimate letters suggesting promises made before her marriage." She held them aloft. "It seems their relationship ran deeper than cousinly affection." Gasps erupted. Colonel Fairfax's face blanched. Lady Thornwood's eyes widened in shock. Mrs. Fane covered her mouth, and Fairchild stared at the floor. Mademoiselle Charpentier's hand flew to her chest, her fan slipping to the floor. Poirot raised a gloved hand. "Let us examine these." He retrieved the letters and unfolded the first, reading silently. "Ah, promises of enduring affection, references to a shared plan, and mention of a certain brocade slippers chapter in her godmother's will, indicating a clause rewarding those who aided her passage into marriage." He looked from Fairfax to Lady Thornwood. "Colonel, is this your handwriting?" The colonel swallowed. "Yes." His voice was barely audible. "My own. We planned to wed after her godmother's passing." He met Poirot's gaze. "I loved her." Lady Thornwood rose. He met Poirot's gaze. "I loved her." Lady Thornwood rose, trembling, "But the will made me sole heir. I believed he would be provided for differently." Tears glistened in her eyes. "I never suspected betrayal." Poirot folded the letter with deliberate calm. "Here, then, is a motive entwined with the deepest of emotions. Love betrayed, financial desperation, fear of a broken promise." He turned to Fairchild. "And you, monsieur, did you advise the colonel of the implications of his choice?" Fairchild hesitated. "I counsel all clients on estate matters," I advised caution. Poirot's gaze shifted to Mademoiselle Charpentier. "And you, who lent funds to Madame, did you learn of this arrangement?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. I discovered their plan and offered refinancing. I hoped to secure my position." Mrs. Fane, voice soft, said, "And I, a beneficiary of Lady Thornwood's generosity, felt envy and despair when her affection lay elsewhere." A heavy silence followed. Each guest now stood bare, their hidden ties to Lady Thornwood exposed. Poirot surveyed the circle. "Mes amis, you are bound by affection, finance, or obligation. In each heart lies a reason to contest the will to steal the slippers as symbols of broken trust. Yet only one among you took action." He let his silence widen, offering no hint as to whom he meant. The flicker of gaslight danced across anxious faces. In that pregnant moment, I sensed that the web of hidden connections had been laid bare, and that the trap set by Poirot would soon ensnare the true culprit in an inescapable revelation. Chapter 10. Poirot's Secret Clue. The household had at last settled into uneasy slumber when Hercule Poirot invited me to join him in the small morning room off the library. The first pale light of dawn filtered through heavy drapes, casting long shadows over the portraits of Claremont ancestors. Poirot stood at the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, studying the flames as if they might reveal the culprit's name. "Monsieur Hastings," he said softly, "we have gathered motives and opportunities in abundance, yet the true solution lies in a single, hidden detail, a clue so discreet that only the most attentive eye could discern its significance." He turned to a small side table where the recovered brocade slippers rested on a velvet cushion. "The time has come to reveal this secret to you." I approached and knelt beside him, heart pounding. Poirot lifted one slipper gently, exposing the silken lining. "Observe, my friend, the interior stitching here." He pointed to a row of tiny, evenly spaced stitches that traced the sole's curve. "It is uniform, consistent with factory work, yet at the heel note the slight variation. The stitch length is shorter, and the thread a shade darker." I traced the area with my fingertip. "Could that be a repair?" I asked. "Exactement," Poirot murmured. "Someone mended this slipper after acquiring it, someone with the skill or the patience to perform a near-invisible alteration. But why repair an item one intends to steal? Rather, the repair marks the object that was handled most intimately." He set the slipper down and picked up the satin pouch found later in the library. "Now examine the lining of the pouch." I peered inside. The satin was of the same blue shade as the slipper's lining, yet my eyes were drawn to a single gold thread caught in the fold. "A stray thread," I observed. "Not stray," Poirot corrected. "Deliberate. That thread matches the embroidery on the slippers themselves. Only one stitch of gold thread matches the precise twist found here." He held it between his gloved fingers. "It proves that the pouch and the slippers were originally paired, yet the seamstress who repaired the sole used a different spool, perhaps under poor light." "But what does it mean?" I pressed. "That the thief is not one of amateur inclination," Poirot explained his, moustaches quivering with excitement. "Only someone accustomed to fine needlework, or someone with access to the original atelier, could spot and mend such a flaw. Moreover, the pouch shows signs of having been reversed inside out before being returned to the library. Notice the faint crease along the drawstring channel, where the cord has rubbed the fabric in the opposite direction of its normal fold." I ran my finger along the crease. "Inconspicuous, but unmistakable." "Precisely. Poirot said. "Now consider this. One suspect among us is known for intimate knowledge of needlework." He paused, allowing the implication to settle. Yet publicly, she projected complete unfamiliarity, deeming such work beneath her station. My mind raced to Mademoiselle Charpentier, who had boasted of her high society detachment from domestic tasks. Or could it have been Lady Thornwood herself, whose childhood included hours in her governess's chambers, mastering such arts? But Poirot held up a finger to forestall any suggestion. "Not yet," he whispered. "We must first confirm one more detail." He set the pouch aside and retrieved Lady Thornwood's torn will fragment. When I examined this parchment, I noted the paper's watermark, a lion rampant beneath a crown. Yet this fragment lacks the watermark. That is impossible if torn from the original document. He tapped the edge. It must be a facsimile or copy. I stared in astonishment. A forgery, then? Oui. Someone prepared a counterfeit will in advance, intending to swap it here after disposing of the genuine copy. And who among us possesses the means to forge aged parchment so convincingly? Poirot's eyes gleamed. The very person who had financial dealings with Lady Thornwood, who lent her funds against the estate, just so they might reuse the paper. I felt a chill. "That points to Mademoiselle Charpentier." Poirot nodded imperceptibly. "Or to Mr. Fairchild, the banker, whose office holds samples of period parchment for official certificates." He allowed the suspicion to hang. "But one more confirmation is needed before I reveal my hand. We shall wait for the arrival of the paper expert I have summoned. In the meantime, I shall observe, unobserved, how each suspect behaves when confronted with the truth that their forgery has been discovered." He lowered his voice further. "Remember, Hastings, the brilliance of the little grey cells is not in shouting the truth, but in allowing it to emerge of its own accord. Tomorrow evening, during our final gathering, I shall lay out this secret clue, and the culprit will be unable to resist the trap it sets." He replaced the fragments and slippers under the protective cloth and turned to the window, gazing out at the still gardens. "Let the others believe they hold the advantage. In truth, the advantage lies with us." He glowed with confident triumph. As dawn's first rays lit the horizon, I felt the quiet surge of certainty behind Poirot's calm facade. He had unearthed the pivotal clue, the hidden thread and the forgery that would soon expose the true mastermind. And though the tapestry of deception remained richly woven, I knew that by tomorrow night a single golden thread would unravel it completely. Chapter 11. Tensions Rise. The next afternoon, the household at Claremont House buzzed with uneasy energy. Word of Poirot's quiet inquiries had spread, and each guest arrived at the drawing-room with a guarded air. I found Hercule Poirot standing by the bay window, observing the storm clouds gathering over the gardens. He turned as I approached, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Hastings," he said in his low, commanding voice, "today we shall allow the tensions to surface. Watch how they circle one another, like hawks probing for weaknesses in flight. Their alliances, their betrayals, all will reveal who stands most eager to see another fall." With that, he motioned for us to take seats among the assembled suspects. Lady Thornwood sat to his left, still pale, but regained in dignity, clutching the recovered will. Colonel Fairfax, rigid as ever, occupied a chair opposite. Mrs. Fane perched on the settee, fan fluttering. Roland Fairchild leaned against a tall bookcase, Mademoiselle Charpentier near the fireplace, and Reverend Pemberton in a high-backed chair at the room's center. Miss Winthrop hovered at the edge, her sculptor's hands twisted in a nervous knot. Poirot began, eyes sweeping the room. Mes amis, yesterday we uncovered a forgery of the will and a clandestine repair of the brocade slippers. Yet one among you believed that replacing innocence with supposition might divert our attention. Pray, who among you enjoys a strategic advantage from confusion? A tense hush fell. Colonel Fairfax's jaw clenched. Mrs. Fane's lips pressed together. Fairchild's gaze flicked to Mademoiselle Charpentier. She offered a polite smile as though oblivious to suspicion. Poirot's gaze settled on Colonel Fairfax. Colonel, you spoke of love betrayed, of promises unmet, yet you persist in accusing others of petty theft rather than examine your own heart. Is that not curious? Fairfax straightened. I act out of concern for Lady Thornwood's reputation. Of course, Poirot murmured, but those who protect another most fiercely often fear their own shame. He turned to Fairchild. Monsieur Fairchild, as executor and financial adviser, you stand to profit from Lady Thornwood's fortunes. You have championed every theory that shifts guilt from your own door. Fairchild's composure cracked. He pushed off the bookcase and paced. A man must safeguard his interests and theirs. I merely seek clarity. And you, Madame Fan, Poirot continued, shifting to the soprano. You envied the attention lavished on the bridesmaids' slippers and the will's recovery. Did you hope that misplacing precious items might recall the world to your own talents? Her fan snapped shut. I would never stoop to such deception. But you would applaud it if it served your purpose, Poirot observed. He turned to Mademoiselle Charpentier. And you, mademoiselle, you lent funds to maintain this very house. Without Lady Thornwood's estate, your loans would go unsecured. A counterfeit will would be most convenient. Mademoiselle Charpentier's smile faltered. Monsieur Poirot, you speak as if I would engineer my own ruin for a chance at repayment. Poirot let the words linger, then raised a hand. I invite you all now to speak freely. Do you trust your companions more than yourselves? Colonel Fairfax broke the silence. He stood abruptly. I trust no one here except Lady Thornwood, and perhaps my own conscience. He glared around the room. I believe the banker, Fairchild, has orchestrated this charade. Who better than he to forge parchment and coach witnesses? Fairchild's lip curled in response. And I trust Lord Fairfax to play hero while concealing a more personal motive. Your letters, Miss Winthrop, reveal a clandestine relationship that fits your sculptor's talent for molding perception. Miss Winthrop's cheeks flushed crimson. How dare you twist my private correspondence? Reverend Pemberton rose, face pale. This bickering merely distracts from the truth. Here we have a case of fraud and theft. We should focus on facts, not insinuations. At his outburst, Mrs. Fane stood too, fan crumpling in her hand. Facts. The only facts I know are that I have nothing to gain by these intrigues, while all around me scheme for advantage. Drums of thunder rumbled outside as though nature itself resented the discord. Mademoiselle Charpentier turned to Lady Thornwood. My lady, there is no honor in this. Yet it seems everyone here would sooner accuse their neighbor than face their own fears. Lady Thornwood lifted her chin, voice steady. Then let us speak plainly. Who among you stole my slippers and hatched this plot against my inheritance? A beat of silence followed, so profound that Poirot leaned forward. Yes, madame. Let us hear the confessions of the guilty. All at once, the room roared with protests and counter-accusations. Fairfax deriding Fairchild's financial machinations, Fairchild mocking Mrs. Fane's theatrical lamentations, Mrs. Fane accusing Mademoiselle Charpentier of cold calculation, Charpentier insinuating the Reverend's benevolence masked darker impulses, and the Reverend chastising them all as sinners. Miss Winthrop shrank away, tears in her eyes. Through the cacophony, Poirot sat unmoved, tapping his cane lightly on the floor. When the storm of voices peaked, he tapped again, sharper this time. At once, silence fell. All eyes turned to him. "My friends," he said, voice calm yet ironclad, "this tempest of suspicion is exactly the theatre required to reveal the guilty soul. Watch now how each returns to themselves when the whirlwind subsides." He rose and moved to the mantel, collecting a small porcelain vase. "I propose we conclude for now, but observe, omitted from these angry charges is any acknowledgment of the crucial evidence, those tiny stitches, the gold thread, the forged parchment. When the storm dies, only one will remain unscathed by the truth." He handed the vase to Lady Thornwood. "Keep these personal items close," he said, indicating the slippers, will, and pouch, "and prepare for our final gathering, where I shall reconstruct the events and unmask the orchestrator of this dark diversion." As the guests dispersed, shoulders hunched, eyes wary, Colonel Fairfax paused to glare at Fairchild. Mrs. Fane offered Miss Winthrop a sympathetic nod. Mademoiselle Charpentier brushed past the Reverend with a stiff curtsy. All departed, leaving Poirot and me in the hush that followed. He turned to me, moustaches twitching. "Hastings, the tension has shown us their true natures. Soon, only the guilty heart will betray itself completely. Let us prepare our final performance." And so, with the stage cleared of masks and polite facades, we awaited the moment when the final, unguarded clue would bring the mystery to its inexorable, brilliant conclusion. Chapter 12. The Confrontation. The late afternoon sunlight slanted through the tall windows of the drawing-room, casting long, wavering shadows that stretched across the oriental rug. Poirot stood before the assembled company, which had dwindled now to the core 5 suspects. Lady Thornwood sat beside him, clutching the recovered will. I stood quietly at Poirot's shoulder, ready to record the next turn in his methodical unraveling of truth. "Mes amis," Poirot began, voice calm yet imbued with a subtle intensity, "we come now to a moment of truth. I have observed each of you closely, your motives, your alibis, your hidden links, yet one of you harbors guilt so complete that it trembles at the finest provocation." He let the silence settle, and in that hush I saw pale fear flicker across Mademoiselle Charpentier's features. Poirot's eyes, gleaming, shifted to the Frenchwoman. "Mademoiselle Charpentier, you are known in society for your cultivated tastes and your appreciation of fine materials. Indeed, you recognized without hesitation the factory stitch of the brocade slippers, and you alone might possess the skill to manipulate their pouch without detection." He paused, gauging her reaction. She lifted her fan, her breathing uneven. Mademoiselle Charpentier's voice, measured at first, betrayed a tremor. "Monsieur Poirot, I merely observed what any woman with cultured eye might, nothing more." "Ah," Poirot said softly, "but when I asked about the counterfeit will, you spoke of lending funds against the estate, yet you hesitated when asked how you came by historical parchment." He fixed her with a steady gaze. "You said your merchants supplied authentic paper, yet such merchants do not deal in medieval watermarks unless one requests them." Her fan halted midway. I I acquired the parchment through an antiquarian in London, she stammered. He assured me of its provenance. And you paid a premium for the watermark of a lion rampant beneath a crown, Poirot replied. A watermark identical to that on the genuine will, down to the minute differences in crown leaf shape. One might only discover such minutiae by handling the original. A document you had access to in this very house. He turned to Lady Thornwood. Recall, madam, you left the will in your boudoir unlocked. Mademoiselle had occasion to visit that room for her mirror, and no other suspect showed interest in the contents of that drawer. Mademoiselle Charpentier's eyes darted about the room, as if searching for escape. Her composure crumbled further when Poirot tapped the mantel, where the brocade slippers rested once more. Consider the repaired stitch on the heel, uniform except for that one shorter, darker thread. A subtle error betrays the seamstress, does it not? She forced a polite nod. Yes, but many seamstresses might have handled them. Perhaps, Poirot conceded. Yet only you declared the factory stitches were too perfect to be amateur, revealing your expertise. Others would not know the difference. And yet you wished us to believe yourself unfamiliar with domestic arts. He leaned forward, voice dropping to a confidential whisper. Why the masquerade? A soft gasp escaped Mademoiselle Charpentier. She drew in a shaky breath, fan dropping to her lap. I never meant harm, she whispered. I loaned money to Lady Thornwood on her promise of inheritance. When I saw her will naming her sole heir, I feared my loan would remain unpaid, so I— Poirot raised a slender hand. Save your breath for honesty, mademoiselle. He rose, moving to place a firm hand on her shoulder. It is the ultimate irony. You, who pride yourself on refinement, resorted to the coarseness of theft and forgery. He turned to the others. Will someone please fetch Inspector Meldrum? I wish to secure Mademoiselle Charpentier's instruments of deception. As the door opened to admit the inspector, Mademoiselle Charpentier's shoulders sagged. She lifted her gaze to Poirot, eyes rimmed with tears. I did not know how else to protect myself, she confessed. I thought if I took the slippers, symbols of Lady Thornwood's promise, and hid the will, I could force her to negotiate repayment. Lady Thornwood's face softened with pity. Mademoiselle, you could have spoken to me. I would have found a way. Mademoiselle Charpentier bowed her head. Fear and pride blinded me. I repented once I saw you distressed. That is why I returned the slipper's pouch, clumsily, as you observed. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Yes, and in your haste to restore appearances, you left the telltale scrap of satin and reversed the pouch. A most theatrical admission of remorse. He straightened, addressing the inspector. Inspector Meldrum, I believe you will find in Mademoiselle's apartment the counterfeit parchment and the tools for her forgery. The inspector inclined his head and stepped toward her. Mademoiselle, I have a warrant. Please gather your belongings. As he spoke, the guests regarded Charpentier with a mixture of sorrow and reproach. Colonel Fairfax offered her a curt nod. Fairchild remained stone-faced. Mrs. Fane smoothed her shawl. Reverend Pemberton murmured a brief prayer. Poirot turned to me, moustaches bristling with satisfaction. Hastings, the crucial mistake was not in the act itself, but in the conviction that fear could hold a woman's conscience hostage. A guilty heart, when pressed by compassion, will reveal its truth. He smiled gently at Mademoiselle Charpentier. And now, the final threads of this tapestry lie in place. The assembled company exhaled as one, tension released. Yet the ultimate resolution still awaited its grand unveiling. In that charged moment, I knew we had irrevocably crossed the line between suspicion and confession, and that tomorrow Poirot would orchestrate the final gathering to lay bare the full narrative, from motive to method, for all to witness. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape night had fallen again over Claremont House, and a hush of uneasy quiet settled throughout its corridors. After Mademoiselle Charpentier's confession, Poirot had placed her in a guest chamber on the east wing, under the discreet watch of 2 constables. Yet even behind closed doors, fear and desperation can spur bold action. I accompanied Poirot as he made his final rounds before retiring, checking each corridor and window latch. At the head of the grand staircase, he paused, listening. In the stillness, we heard the faintest scuffle coming from the east wing, a hurried creaking sound as if someone pressed against floorboards not meant for their weight. "Monsieur Hastings," Poirot whispered, "it seems Our Lady of Refinement seeks a late-night promenade." He slipped from my side and moved with surprising rapidity for a man of his stature, descending the stairs on silent feet. I followed, heart pounding, as we crept along the carpeted corridor outside Mademoiselle Charpentier's chamber. The door stood slightly ajar, and within a corridor lantern cast a narrow beam across the polished floor. Mademoiselle Charpentier herself emerged in a simple wrap, clutching a slim leather portfolio, the very one containing the counterfeit will and gold thread evidence. She glided forward, turning the corner toward the window at the corridor's end. Poirot and I pressed against the opposite wall, watching her back hunch in resolve as she reached the window latch. With a deft twist, exactly the kind of skill used to reverse the slipper pouch, she eased the sash upward. "Ah, there you are." Poirot's voice rang suddenly, measured, yet carrying unmistakable authority. Mademoiselle Charpentier froze, the portfolio tucked beneath one arm as she faced him. Her eyes widened in panic. "Monsieur Poirot," she stammered, voice trembling. Please." He raised a single finger. "Mademoiselle, step away from that window." She shook her head, lips quivering. "You cannot hold me here. My reputation, my position, everything is lost. I must retrieve my papers." She clutched the portfolio to her chest, swaying as if uncertain whether to bolt forward or crumble. Poirot advanced slowly, hands open in placating gesture. "I understand your fear, but escape would only compound your troubles. You are accused of forgery and theft. The law will not be merciful to one who attempts flight." Desperation flickered in her gaze. She took a step toward the open window, wind whispering through the gap. "If I remain, they will humiliate me, strip me of every last courtesy. No one will believe I acted only to preserve my livelihood." Poirot's expression softened momentarily. "You speak of reputation, yet you risk your very freedom. Listen, mademoiselle. Justice seeks truth, not revenge. Confession was your first step. Now accept its consequences gracefully." She hesitated, gaze darting between Poirot and the open night beyond. Instinct battled reason within her. Finally she sank to her knees, portfolio sliding to the floor. "I cannot face them in the morning," she whispered, tears escaping. "They will jeer my name." Poirot knelt beside her, lifting her chin with gentle kindness. "Mademoiselle, courage is not absence of fear, but mastery of it. You have already faced the greatest trial, admitting your crime. Now, face its outcome." He straightened and addressed me. "Hastings, retrieve the portfolio." I stepped forward and picked up the slim folder, noting the edges stained with ink and the faint gold thread entwined between loose pages. Mademoiselle Charpentier watched in trembling silence as I handed it to Poirot. He turned the portfolio in his hands, then opened it to reveal not only the forged will, but also the small tools of her deception. A paper knife, a quill with dried gold ink residue, and scraps of parchment bearing watermarks. He closed the folder and tucked it under his arm. "Your materials, mademoiselle, will assist the authorities in understanding your means and method." He handed her a small handkerchief. "Use this to compose yourself." She pressed the cloth to her face, every ounce of her poise shattered. The moonlight through the window glittered on her tear-streaked cheeks. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, voice shaky, "I am ashamed." He inclined his head. "Shame is the beginning of contrition. Now stand, and let us return to the drawing-room. In the morning, Inspector Meldrum will question you further." Mademoiselle Charpentier rose unsteadily, and Poirot guided her away from the window. I closed the sash behind us, securing the latch as he had taught me. The corridor returned to silence, save for the distant tick of a grandfather clock. As we reached the top of the stairs, Poirot paused and looked back. "Observe, Hastings. In her moment of greatest panic, she sought only to flee her shame, not to harm another. Yet that action confirms both her guilt and her humanity." I nodded, awed by his insight. She truly believed escape was her only hope. "Precisely," Poirot replied. "And now no further attempts will be made. Tomorrow we shall gather the final pieces and present the complete narrative to our guests and to justice." He glanced at his watch. "Come, my friend. The night grows late, and we both require rest before the grand denouement." We left the east wing and descended into the silent heart of the house, the portfolio secure, the culprit under watch, and the stage set for the finale that awaited the dawn. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. The dawn light crept through the lace curtains of the library, illuminating motes of dust that danced upon the hearth. After the night's tumult, the confession and Mademoiselle Charpentier's desperate flight attempt, Poirot and I returned to the scene of so many clues: the ebony table, the walnut cabinet, and the boudoir where the will had been stolen and replaced. It was here, amid these familiar trinkets, that the final piece would emerge. Poirot moved directly to the cabinet, lifting the silk handkerchief I had retrieved from Charpentier's person the previous night. The embroidered initials, "I.C. so neatly rendered," contrasted sharply with the dark smudge of talcum powder still clinging to one corner. He spread the handkerchief upon the cabinet's surface, aligning it with the faint residue on the handle. "Hastings," he said, voice low, "observe the pattern of the smudge." A single arc, repeated twice, suggests someone pressed firmly, then dragged across the wood in the act of opening and closing. The handkerchief matches not only the powder, but the precise curve of the cabinet's ornate brass handle. I knelt to inspect the handle, tracing its rounded contour. Yes, the arc aligns perfectly with the handkerchief's stain, but I thought we had confirmed only the pouch and will were hidden elsewhere. Poirot tapped his cane lightly. "True." Poirot tapped his cane lightly. "True. But the scarf-like quality of this handkerchief betrays another secret. It was used to conceal the slippers temporarily within the cabinet. Notice the clasp marks upon the fabric. Tiny impressions, where the brocade slipper's clasp once pressed against the soft linen." I uncurled the handkerchief, and found, amid the powder and thread, a tiny clasp fragment of gold metal. "It fell here," I murmured, examining the fragment against the slipper's clasps. "An exact match." Mon ami, this is our linchpin, Poirot said, placing the fragment carefully into an envelope. Mademoiselle Charpentier, in her remorse, removed the slippers from her person and stowed them in the cabinet, hoping to delay their discovery until she could negotiate with Lady Thornwood. In doing so, she pressed her silk handkerchief to the handle, leaving this incontestable evidence. He stood and walked to the boudoir, the recovered will resting on the desk. But that, my friend, is not all. He lifted the blotter and extracted a letter I had overlooked, a torn envelope, sealed with black wax, bearing the baronet's crest. Inside lay a brief missive from Lady Thornwood's godmother, warning of unscrupulous lenders. Poirot unfolded the note with reverence. Listen to this passage. Beware the velvet gloves that hide iron grasp. Those who lend from the shadows demand their due in kind. It was intended as cautionary counsel for my lady. He held the note aloft. Yet this letter was never mentioned by any suspect, except by Mademoiselle Charpentier, who claimed ignorance of its existence. I frowned. She said she found the will under the blotter. She did not speak of this note. Precisely, Poirot said. By omitting reference to the letter, she hoped to conceal her understanding of Lady Thornwood's financial vulnerabilities. She knew that Godmother's counsel might deter suspicion from herself, encouraging Lady Thornwood to question other creditors. He paused, turning to me. Thus, the final piece. The clasp fragment in the cabinet locks the slipper's hiding place to Charpentier's handkerchief, while the secret letter confirms her knowledge of Lady Thornwood's predisposition to fear her lenders. With these two facts, the tapestry of deception is complete. Motive of financial desperation, opportunity in unlocked cabinets, and method through delicate concealment and forgery. I felt a thrill of admiration. It is perfect, Poirot. He smiled, moustaches quivering. Naturellement, but evidence must be presented at its fullest clarity. We shall allow the suspect to reflect on these facts before the grand denouement. In the meantime, I shall prepare my notes. As I watched him collect the fragment, letter, and handkerchief into the evidence bag, I realized how every subtle detail, each bend of a clasp, each crease in a pocket, each unstated admonition in a private letter, had led us inexorably to this conclusion. The layers of misdirection had been peeled away, leaving the singular truth: Mademoiselle Charpentier's carefully plotted deception. Poirot turned to me, eyes bright with determination. Now, Hastings, we await the appointed hour. When I call the company together, they will see that the smallest clue can speak the loudest, and they will understand how the little grey cells prevail over the grandest designs. He closed the evidence bag with a snap and secured it. Let us rest briefly, mon ami. Tonight we orchestrate the final performance, one that will leave no doubt in the hearts of those assembled as to the fate of the vanishing brocade slippers. With that, he placed the bag in his coat pocket and led me from the library, the final piece firmly in hand. As the day's light waned and the moment of revelation drew ever nearer. Chapter 15. The Final Gathering. Late that afternoon, Poirot dispatched handwritten invitations to the remaining guests, requesting their presence in the drawing-room at 6 o'clock sharp. By 1:15, the velvet curtains were drawn, candles lit, and a hush settled over Claremont House. Each suspect entered with cautious dignity, Lady Thornwood at the centre, Colonel Fairfax to her right, Roland Fairchild to her left, with Reverend Pemberton, Mrs. Vane, and Miss Winthrop arrayed along the settee. I stood discreetly by Poirot's side, ready to record what transpired. Poirot stood before the ebony table, his posture immaculate, moustaches quivering with latent excitement. He swept his gaze over the assembly. "Mes amis," he began, "we gather now to consider all that has occurred since the brocade slippers first vanished." He raised a slender hand. "Before we proceed, let us review the salient facts." He lifted a small evidence bag and produced the fragment of gold clasp. This fragment was found within the walnut cabinet's handle, pressed into the silk of Mademoiselle Charpentier's handkerchief. It matches precisely the clasp on the slippers, proving they rested here. He paused, letting eyes flick between Charpentier's empty chair and the others. Yet no one else's handkerchief bears this mark. Next, he produced the folded letter from the godmother. Within Lady Thornwood's desk lay this warning: "Beware the velvet gloves that hide iron grasp." Only one person showed knowledge of this admonition. He looked to the empty seat again. Others professed ignorance. He then displayed the satin pouch, turned inside out. This, returned to its original place but reversed, revealed a crease known only to someone accustomed to manipulating fine fabrics. The scattered gold thread indicates the pouch and slippers were paired by one with an eye for detail. Finally, he held up the tattered scrap of parchment. And this, once thought the original will, proved to be a facsimile torn from a copied document. The genuine will, recovered from the bookshelf, names Lady Thornwood sole heir. Our forger had access to the parchment and the original text. He folded the scrap and placed it gently on the table. The room lay silent, breaths held tight. Poirot's voice softened. These elements combined to tell a single story. Someone coveted Lady Thornwood's inheritance and sought first to intimidate her by hiding her slippers, then by falsifying her will so as to force a renegotiation of their indebtedness. He paused, letting the implications settle. Colonel Fairfax's jaw tightened. Fairchild's expression darkened. Mrs. Fane's hands clenched her fan. Miss Winthrop's eyes glistened with sympathy for Lady Thornwood. Reverend Pemberton bowed his head briefly. Poirot folded his hands. The question remains: who among us possessed both motive sufficient and means precise enough to carry out these? Who among us possessed both motive sufficient and means precise enough to carry out these delicate operations? His gaze fixed on each face in turn. Consider again the evidence: the clasp in the cabinet, the gold thread in the pouch, the reversed seam, the counterfeit parchment, and the secret letter's knowledge. He turned to Lady Thornwood. "Madame, you found your will missing and your slippers gone. Yet your heart remained true to those you trusted. You speak of fear, but no calculated action. You were neither lender nor seamstress." She shook her head, eyes wide with relief at the clear exoneration. Poirot then addressed Colonel Fairfax. "You confessed love and financial strain, but the clasp fragment does not bear your insignia, and you lacked access to the parchment workshop." The colonel stiffened, but offered no defense. He shifted to Roland Fairchild. "You serve as executor and banker, yet you produce no samples of period parchment, nor is there evidence of your handshake brushing wireless powder from a cabinet handle. Your alibi stands." His gaze then found Reverend Pemberton. "Your faith led you to discard the scrap of satin. You hold genuine horror at deception, yet your hands bear no sign of stitches or forged ink." He looked to Mrs. Fane. "Your artistry and envy might incline you to dramatic gestures, but the factory stitches evaded even your discerning eye, and your fan bore no sign of the gold thread." At last, Poirot's eyes alighted on Miss Winthrop. She sat, trembling yet dignified. "Miss Winthrop, you sketched orchids in the conservatory and washed your gloves in haste. You spoke truth when you claimed nothing handled was heavier than your sketchbook. Yet note, your gloved fingers bear neither powder nor clasp impression, and you lack knowledge of the godmother's note. Nor did you possess the skill for meticulous seam work." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "Mes amis, none of these could point but to one person, one who combined the means to procure antique parchment, the familiarity with fine fabrics to reverse a pouch and mend a slipper, the motive of debt to Lady Thornwood, and the willingness to deceive even under the threat of scandal." A tremor ran through the room. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. "Mademoiselle Charpentier." At the name, footsteps sounded in the corridor. Inspector Meldrum entered, followed by 2 constables. The Frenchwoman rose, her posture rigid. Poirot continued, loud enough for all to hear, but with gravity. "Mademoiselle admitted in private both theft and forgery. Here is the confession you requested." He held out a folded paper. "Read it, if you please, Inspector." Inspector Meldrum took the paper and scanned it, nodding solemnly. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot, it is a full confession." He stepped forward and passed Mademoiselle Charpentier, who stood motionless, eyes lowered. Poirot allowed a moment before speaking again. Thus, the vanishing slippers and the counterfeit will were but chapters in her grand design to leverage Lady Thornwood's fear into payment. He turned to the company. "And now justice may proceed." Lady Thornwood exhaled, a single tear escaping. Colonel Fairfax closed his eyes. Colonel Fairfax bowed his head. Mrs. Fang dabbed at her cheeks. Miss Winthrop placed a gentle hand on Lady Thornwood's shoulder. Reverend Pemberton murmured a prayer. Poirot smiled gently, moustaches quivering. "The little grey cells, mes amis, have spoken. What seemed a trifling theft revealed a larger scheme, but careful observation and unrelenting pursuit of truth have prevailed." He swept a final glance over the gathered faces. "Let us now close this affair and restore peace to Claremont House." As Inspector Meldrum escorted Mademoiselle Charpentier away, Poirot turned to me, eyes bright. "Mon ami, we have done well. But the final reveal, the explanation of every subtle move, remains for tomorrow's closing remarks." With that, the company dispersed, each carrying the weight of understanding and relief, while Poirot and I lingered in the candlelit room, knowing the grand denouement awaited the morrow. Chapter 16. The Reveal. The drawing-room was hushed once more when Merlin lights glowed over polished wood and damask walls. A fine drizzle tapped against the windows, echoing the tension in the air. Poirot rose from his chair beside Lady Thornwood and addressed the remaining company: Monsieur Fairchild, Colonel Fairfax, Mrs. Fane, Reverend Pemberton, and Miss Winthrop, with that quiet authority which brooked no interruption. "Mes amis," he began, voice smooth as velvet, "you have heard of Mademoiselle Charpentier's confession and seen the evidence of her forgery and theft. Yet I believe a full explanation of her machinations and the nuance of her misdirection is due." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to settle. "Only by understanding the precise sequence of events can we truly lay this affair to rest." He moved to the ebony table, where the brocade slippers rested once again on their velvet cushion. "Let us first reconstruct the initial theft. Shortly after Lady Thornwood placed her godmother's gift upon this table, Mademoiselle Charpentier, imbued with knowledge of fine fabrics, slipped away under the pretense of examining her reflection in the boudoir mirror. Poirot's gaze swept the witnesses. With deft fingers, she lifted the slippers and concealed them within her own cloak, leaving behind only the imprint of the case's drawstring upon the napkin. He turned to Colonel Fairfax. "You noted the scratch on the table and presumed it came from a box. In truth, it was made when the slippers were slid into Mademoiselle's pouch, pressed and shifted as she bore them off." Poirot walked to the walnut cabinet. Next, our culprit sought a secure hiding place. She reversed the satin pouch to mask its true appearance, and tucked it behind the cabinet door, careful to transfer a bit of gold thread to the handle, an accidental souvenir of its craftsmanship. He lifted the cabinet's handle. This misstep led to the fragment pressed into her handkerchief. He produced the scrap of blue satin. This fragment, found later in the library, was torn when she attempted to return the pouch, hoping to delay suspicion until she could exploit her leverage. Moving to the boudoir desk, Poirot arranged the will, the blotter, and the secret letter from the godmother. Simultaneously, Mademoiselle forged a counterfeit will. Using knowledge gleaned from Lady Thornwood's cabinet of letters, she procured antique parchment, identical to the original by watermark, and copied the text, substituting the godmother's generous clause with a lender's clause favorable to herself. He indicated the note. The godmother's warning, "Beware the velvet gloves," was known to Mademoiselle via this private letter, giving her confidence to act. He held the counterfeit will. After hiding the genuine document in the bookshelf, with the subtle pressure of that same handkerchief, she placed the fake under the blotter, confident no one would notice until it was too late. Poirot turned to the assembled guests, voice firm. But here her plan faltered. Her intimate knowledge of seamwork betrayed her. The factory stitches on the slippers revealed a single irregular stitch, evidence of repair made by her, a practiced hand that believed it unseen. He raised one slipper. By mending the sole and by reversing the pouch, she thought she could pass the slippers unnoticed through the cabinet. He walked slowly between Colonel Fairfax and Fairchild. Had she succeeded, she would have presented demands for repayment of her loans, in effect blackmailing Lady Thornwood under threat of releasing the counterfeit will or withholding the slippers. Only then would she negotiate terms favorable to her interests. He paused, allowing the full implication to register. Mrs. Fane gasped softly. Reverend Pemberton pressed his lips together. Miss Winthrop's hand fluttered to her chest. Colonel Fairfax's face bore lines of regret. Poirot raised a slender finger. Thus, mes amis, the vanishing was not mere petty theft, but a calculated gambit. Mademoiselle Charpentier believed she held both the key to Lady Thornwood's fortunes and a weapon of intimidation. He looked to Miss Winthrop. Your release and assistance in recovering the genuine will were collateral to her scheme, an unintended kindness that revealed her forgery. He turned finally to Lady Thornwood. Madam, you were the true victim of sentiment and calculation, yet through courage and steadfast trust, you allowed the truth to emerge. He inclined his head. Let us now thank the little grey cells for their unerring logic and the bonds of honor that preserve justice in society. A gentle murmur of assent rippled through the room. Inspector Meldrum stepped forward and nodded respectfully to Poirot, before leading the constables to take Mademoiselle Charpentier into custody. Poirot watched with a serene expression as the door closed behind them. Then he swept the room with his keen gaze, capturing each face. Mes amis, justice, though slow, arrives with precision. Let this affair serve as a reminder. In the grandest parlor or the most clandestine passage, The smallest clue can illuminate the darkest designs. He turned to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. Hastings, the reveal is complete. Tomorrow we share our reflections, but tonight let us allow Lady Thornwood peace in her restored inheritance and dignity. As the guests gathered around Lady Thornwood, offering solace and admiration, Poirot and I slipped quietly to the window. The rain had ceased, leaving the garden glistening under the lanterns. In that tranquil moment, I recognized the elegance of Poirot's reasoning. Each detail, however minute, contributed to the whole. And in the end, truth, like a refined brocade, revealed its beauty through the careful weaving of threads both visible and concealed. Chapter 17. Outcome and Justice. The morning sun shone weakly through misted panes as Claremont House stirred to a quieter rhythm. The long night of revelations had passed, and in its wake lay a sense of relief mingled with lingering unease. In the drawing-room, Lady Thornwood sat at the head of the table, composing herself with quiet dignity. Around her gathered those who had endured the ordeal: Colonel Fairfax, Reverend Pemberton, Mrs. Fane, Roland Fairchild, and Miss Winthrop. Even the ever-dignified Sir Edgar Blackwell glanced relieved. The spectre of scandal had at last been laid to rest. Poirot stood before them, hands folded behind his back, his expression calm but grave. At his side, I observed the soft interplay of emotions across the circle: contrition, sympathy, lingering embarrassment, and the tentative stirrings of reconciliation. Mademoiselle Charpentier's fate, Poirot began, voice measured, is now in the hands of the law. Justice will take its course, tempered by her admission of remorse and cooperation. But I trust that society, while stern, possesses mercy for one who confessed so fully. He paused to let the words settle. Lady Thornwood's eyes glistened, and Colonel Fairfax bowed his head in silent acknowledgment. In that moment, the circle felt the weight of collective judgment, yet softened by the understanding that truth had prevailed. Poirot continued, "As for the rest of us, let this affair strengthen our resolve to act with honor. Colonel, your generosity in championing Miss Winthrop's innocence reflects the nobler side of chivalry. Madame Fane, your musical charity to the local children's hospital will now benefit from Lady Thornwood's renewed patronage. Reverend, your steadfast faith has offered comfort throughout. Perhaps a public acknowledgment of your parish's good works is in order." Mrs. Fane curtsied gracefully. "Monsieur Poirot, I shall dedicate my next concert to healing hearts, in gratitude for your guidance." Reverend Pemberton inclined his head. "And I shall speak openly of this trial, exhorting my flock to honesty and compassion." Poirot turned to Roland Fairchild. The banker's face remained composed, but I detected a flicker of humility. "Monsieur Fairchild, I trust you will continue in your role as executor with renewed integrity, mindful of the trust Lady Thornwood places in you." Fairchild inclined his head. "You have my word, Monsieur Poirot, and mine, madam, that I shall serve with the utmost fidelity." Miss Winthrop, seated beside Lady Thornwood, offered a gentle smile. "I am grateful to you all for your faith in me," she said quietly. "This experience has taught me the value of trust and the fragility of reputation." Lady Thornwood reached for her cousin's hand. "Your courage in facing false accusations has restored my belief in loyalty, Harriet." Her voice thickened with gratitude. Poirot's eyes softened as he surveyed the restored harmony. "And now, the vanishing brocade slippers shall remain a cherished memento, no longer of betrayal, but of the triumph of truth." He nodded to the small velvet cushion upon which the slippers rested. their gold embroidery catching the light. A gentle silence followed, broken only by the distant chiming of the manor clock. Each person seemed to consider the journey they had traversed, from suspicion to vindication, from deception to confession. In that hush, Claremont House itself felt to breathe more freely, as if relieved by the clearing of dark clouds. Then Sir Edgar Blackwell, who had until now observed in polite reserve, stepped forward. "If I may, madame, or said to Lady Thornwood, allow me to host a small luncheon in the great hall today, celebrating your restored household." He turned to the guests. "Let us set aside this chapter with fellowship as true friends should." Murmured approvals rose, and the circle broke into soft exchanges of plans. Colonel Fairfax offered to procure flowers. Mrs. Fane volunteered to lend music. The Reverend pledged a blessing over the meal. Fairchild promised to settle any outstanding bills without delay. As the guests dispersed to prepare for the luncheon, Poirot motioned to me. He led me to a small alcove where canvases of ancestors observed from gilded frames. "You see, Hastings," he said quietly, "justice need not be harsh to be effective. The threads of this tapestry have been rewoven into something stronger." I nodded, reflecting on the morning's changes. "Society has endured its test," I replied, "and each of us, victim, suspect, and witness, has learned something of integrity." Poirot offered one of his rare, soft smiles. "Indeed, and Mademoiselle Charpentier, though destined for consequences, has shown that even the gravest misstep can lead to repentance." He glanced toward the corridor, where a constable awaited. "She departs now for the magistrate's chambers. Let us trust that compassion and justice walk hand in hand." He straightened, adjusting his coat. "Come, Hastings. Before luncheon, I believe a brief moment of rest is warranted. The final closing remarks, where I reflect upon the human condition and the triumph of the little grey cells, await their appointment." With that, he turned toward the library door, leaving me to absorb the scene. A household healed, a mystery resolved, and the subtle promise that, in the interplay of deceit and detection, truth ultimately prevails. Chapter 18. The closing remark. The drawing-room had emptied of its guests, the last echo of polite farewells fading into the corridors of Claremont House. Soft afternoon light poured upon the polished floorboards, illuminating the rare tapestry now restored to its place above the mantel. I found Hercule Poirot alone before the ebony table, where the brocade slippers lay arranged on their velvet cushion once more. He regarded them thoughtfully, fingers steepled under his chin. "Monsieur Poirot," I ventured, "will these slippers ever be worn again?" He turned to me, eyes bright with satisfaction. "Ah, Hastings, the significance of these slippers has transcended their function. They are now a symbol of fear overcome, of deceit unmasked, and of the triumph of the little grey cells." He paused, tilting his head as though catching a note on the wind. "And so, my friend, it is time for our closing reflection." He walked to the center of the room and drew a slow breath, as though gathering every detail into his mind. This affair of the vanishing brocade slippers and the counterfeit will was, on its surface, a trifling theft and a forgery, petty crimes in the grand scheme of society's challenges. Yet within its delicate folds lay a lesson. That human nature, in all its grandeur and frailty, can twist the simplest object into an instrument of fear or hope. He gestured toward the velvet cushion. Lady Thornwood's slippers represented promise, an inheritance of love, memory, and trust. When they disappeared, that promise seemed broken. But in their recovery, and in the unmasking of Mademoiselle Charpentier's scheme, we were reminded that the true fabric of inheritance lies not in gold thread or parchment, but in honor and compassion. Poirot's gaze swept the room, taking in every polished surface. Consider the participants in this drama: Colonel Fairfax, whose love blinded him to prudence; Roland Fairchild, whose duty tempered his ambition; Mrs. Vane, whose artistry yearned for recognition; Reverend Pemberton, whose faith shielded him from falsehood; Miss Winthrop, whose integrity never wavered despite injustice; and Lady Thornwood herself, who met betrayal with grace. He raised a gloved hand. Each played a part, each revealed a truth, but only one allowed fear to warp her reason. He smiled gently. Mademoiselle Charpentier, though she committed a grievous error, showed that even the most refined can fall prey to desperation. Yet it is also through acknowledgment of that desperation, through confession and remorse, that redemption begins. Poirot stepped closer to the window and drew aside the curtain, revealing a silver mist garden beyond. Behold, Hastings, how the morning dew glistens upon every leaf. Each droplet, though small, reflects the whole. Sky, tree, and sun. So too do our actions, however minute, cast reflections across our lives. A single stitch, a torn letter, a moment's hesitation, all carried weight. He turned, moustaches quivering in a wry grin. And what of the little grey cells? They do not rest until every thread is counted and every knot untied. He tapped his head lightly. They whisper, "Observe the small things, Hastings, for therein lies the greatest clarity." I nodded, recalling each subtle clue: the scratch upon the table, the powder in the cabinet, the reversed fold of the pouch, the mismatched stitch, that singular gold thread, the counterfeit parchment, the secret letter, and, above all, the human motives woven through each act. Poirot approached the table and lifted the slippers. He cradled them as though they were relics. May these remain here as a reminder that trust must be guarded, yet never abandoned, that justice need not be draconian, but must be unwavering, and that in every heart there lies the capacity for both darkness and light. He placed the slippers back upon their cushion and turned to me. "Hastings, mon ami, let us depart. We leave behind a house restored, a lady vindicated, and lessons learned." He reached for his cane and gave it a gentle tap. The world awaits other puzzles, some grand, some small, but always requiring the same meticulous attention and, yes, the same compassion. We walked to the door together. He paused in the threshold, looking back at the tranquil room. "Adieu, Claremont House," he said softly. "May its halls echo now with peace, not suspicion. And may those who enter remember that the truth, like the finest brocade, reveals its pattern only under the keenest eye." With that, Hercule Poirot lifted his hat in a final salute, then descended the steps with the measured grace of a man whose work was done. I followed, carrying the weight of his reflections with me, that even the simplest of mysteries holds within it the complex tapestry of human motive, and that the greatest triumph lies in unraveling it.